Welcome to our podcast, Keeping It Real for Asians, with Sweta
and Meehir. Through these honest and raw conversations, we will be sharing our real lived-in experiences, practical tips, and wisdom to begin breaking long-held myths and perceptions. Stay tuned as we will be covering such topics as sexuality, relationships, creativity, personal mastery, and leadership as modern Asians.
Our end result is keeping it real for British Asians to come out of the shadows and reconnect back to the light of their greatness. Whilst dropping the masks and conditioning us Asians carry, we believe it all starts with a conversation.
If you just hold on to those emotions, right, they are then at some point gonna want to burst and come out, and if they do, it's gonna be in a dysfunctional way, right?
Yeah, it's not easy.
It's not easy, no.
But it is simple. You're absolutely right. It's simple.
What I've described is quite simple, right? In terms of for want of a better word, as a process.
Yeah,
right?
let's take anger, for example, right? I think anger is a hugely misunderstood emotion. But it's also one of the most powerful emotions that we have. I used to really repress my anger, like really repress it and suppress it. And then if I would have, I think a lot of men do, really kind of cost me a lot of mental stability and well-being.
You're right. It is about that boundaries piece of yes, this, and no to that. There is that. If you look at it from the elements point of view, it's that fieriness, right? And fire isn't bad, right? But if fire is out of control, then it causes destruction, which we know. But a little bit of fire is actually good. Point where it was just so much anger towards me that this man was directing, which mainly, if you think about it, he's hurt. He's hurt, he's upset because the relationship's coming to an end.
Welcome back to the series of conversations me and Sweta are having. So the previous episode that we did, we left you on a little bit of a teaser around what we want to talk about next. And it was mainly around, how to operate powerfully and healthily in the face of someone who's being what we would categorize or label as being unhealthy with you. They're being a little bit disruptive, a bit dysfunctional, especially if it's a member of the opposite sex as well as, the same sex. But mainly, I really want us to talk about how we can do it in the face of like the opposite sex, because I do think, based on what me and Sweta have kind of spoken about, is that we do struggle to talk to each other on a level, and stuff can come up when we're talking about things that we may feel really, really vulnerable about, and if we harbor any sort of deep-seated shame and guilt, it's like the chances of you kind of having a bit of getting triggered, as they would call it, is it's really kind of it's a thing that can happen, without you even realizing sometimes. So we want to have a conversation about that, and we're trying not to be prescriptive or like this is the way to do it. I think everyone knows how to do it right, but I think what we talked about yesterday, when we are not self-regulated, when we don't have the personal self-mastery around ourselves, communicating whilst we're having, inner emotional turmoil, or if someone else is, can be a very challenging experience. So we want to kind of put some bits and bobs out there and discuss, like, what Sweta does, what I do, what we both sort of agree on, and what would still a work in progress for each of us and stuff like that. Yeah.
And I love what you said towards the tail end of the last episode, right? So we introduced around personal self-mastery. We talked about self-regulating and how it all starts with awareness, right? Having awareness of yourself and how you show up when it's in the dysfunctional way, and how you can show up in a functional way.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a level of personal self-mastery. But then how do you stay healthy? I love how you coined it. How do you stay healthy in the midst of unhealthiness around you?
Yes.
Right? That is it. And
Yes.
that is my, ladies and gentlemen, that is personal self-mastery in action daily, if not every hour, if not every moment in your life,
Yeah.
because there are constant triggers around us. Right. And it's not necessarily always going to be, the obvious ones, the ones that you don't like or you have conflicting opinions with. It could be like, even for me, it could be my daughter. My own daughter is also someone that can trigger me.
Yeah.
Right. Yet that's a very loving relationship. But, there are points, and I'm sure there are other parents out there can empathize with this, where they get on our nerves. They test us. Right. There's like and that in itself, it's a great example. It's a great playground in a way of mastering that self-regulation, of then getting back to yourself, of knowing then where you're switching from and being an unhealthy version of yourself and getting back to being healthy. When you're getting triggered because they're pissing you off, you're getting angry, you're like getting late for school or whatever it might be. And then it's that ability to then self-regulate, because children, they don't know how to regulate. Come on.
Well,
Right.
they don't know how to do it without the support of an adult.
Yes, exactly. So that's a good playground then for us to then know, right, they can't. So it's even more important to double down to self-regulating yourself. So that's a good, I say playground deliberately. It's a good sort of way to then master that in your own kind of home life, so that when you are triggered by the bigger things and people outside, you're able to turn that around quite quickly. Even if there is going to be a reaction, like you and I, we're not perfect, right? We're human, and everyone's going to have a human reaction to someone, right? If someone is going to, go for you, you're going to have naturally your defense mechanism is going to come up, right? But it's that ability to notice those cues, have that awareness, and then being able to turn that around, right? And that is the business that you and I are in, right? That is what we
Pretty
support
much.
people in, right?
Yeah,
In
pretty
that
much.
personal self-mastery journey, working with consciousness levels and working with awareness and the body, right? And then seeing where those cues are. But sometimes it can be the smallest things that you don't
Yeah.
even know you're aware of that can put you in an unhealthy environment, that can set off a pattern in you. And I know for me, this happens. Like, so for me, I'm a single parent, right? And there's a narrative out there amongst a lot of single parents, a lot of mothers who are single parents in particular, where, and I can empathize with them, where they are, the child or children are with them the majority of the time. Yeah. And so therefore they're feeling they've got to take on the role of mum and dad. Right. And I hear this narrative a lot with a lot of single parents, a lot of single mums saying, I've got to be mum and dad. I've got to be mum and dad. And then in me, that triggers something in me. Whilst they're saying it, they're well-meaning of what they are saying, that triggers in me, as I was talking in the previous episode, there's that Sweta Pro side, right? That triggers her,
Yeah.
right? That triggers her to come into, Little Miss Independent. It's me, my daughter against the world. I've got to be the provider. That gets triggered, right? So it's the littlest things that can trigger that pattern. And then it's for me to notice, hold on, no, that's an unhealthy dialogue. But it's not only an unhealthy dialogue for me, it's also an unhealthy dialogue for these women, to think that they have got to take on the role of a man. They've got to play the role of dad. Even just the thought of it, even just thinking about it now, I can feel like a weight on my shoulders. I feel, oh my God, it feels heavy. That's a heavy weight and burden you're taking on, of taking on quite a very heavy masculine role. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a case of, well, hold on a second. And I was guilty of this too. I used to play that same narrative of thinking I've got to play mum and dad. Right. I felt that heaviness. I had that played back with a lot of single parents that I was around.
Yeah.
And then I was like, this isn't right. It's unhealthy. Right. It doesn't mean that I stopped hanging around those women, but I offered an alternative narrative to them. saying, hold on, why are you taking on? We don't have the anatomy to be a man. We aren't.
Yeah.
Well, so why are we suddenly thinking we've got to play dad? And actually, our superpower is in being the amazing, awesome woman that we are. Yeah. Embracing our own authentic self, our authentic own unique masculine and feminine energy, and embodying that. And then whoever the father is in their life, let them come in, and have other positive male role models around them. Right. So and that I offered that as a narrative, but it was also more of a reinforcement for me and part of my self-regulation and personal self-mastery of, hey, Shweta, come back to yourself.
Yeah.
We're not doing that. So sometimes it can be in high stress situations where you get triggered, but also it can be by those little things that people say quite innocently that can trigger you and put you into your dysfunctional old patterns, your unconscious belief patterns getting triggered. Yeah. But you've got to be having awareness of it to know when it's being triggered. And I'm sure that's happened with you, Meehir. There's the blatantly obvious ones, but there's also those subtle ones. And it's the subtle ones that you've got to really look out for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, definitely. Because, I really kind of, sometimes when you're triggered, it's obvious. And, you have a visceral reaction, as they say, and, something happens, you behave, in accordance with how you're feeling emotionally. And sometimes you have I have a lot of delayed reactions. And I get my triggers are delayed sometimes. Sometimes someone could say or do something and to me or in my presence or whatever, and then initially I might be fine, and then afterwards I could feel this volcano inside me about to erupt. But the thing is, one of the things I do want to do is, we're talking about healthy, unhealthy, right? I think what would serve is, between myself and Sweta, we'll kind of define what we think healthy is.
That's
right.
Good. Yeah.
And then it would become quite obvious what unhealthy is. Okay. So what's healthy? And we've talked about self-regulation. We talk about personal mastery, self-mastery. So that's what is healthy. Now, let's give that a little bit, let's put a little bit more meat on the bones here. So one of the things is, okay, we are going to be triggered as human beings. We're going to have emotional responses. We're going to have emotional reactions in relationship to ourselves, others, and the world. It's going to happen. It happens all the time, right? Some reactions are like ones that we like and we enjoy. And some reactions, the ones we're going to be talking about today, are mostly the ones that really don't make us, leave us feeling very disempowered or not like ourselves, or like we have to kind of posture or pretend or kind of repress or suppress our authenticity in some shape or form. So one of the healthiest things is being able to recognize when you are triggered and then not behaving from there, like not actually playing out your emotional reaction, but recognizing it for what it is. It's just an emotional reaction. Now, let's say it's in response to what someone has said. The things that I do these days is one of the things I do practice, part of my practice is something around something called the 4 agreements, the 5 agreements. It's a Toltec wisdom, and it's from a Toltec master called Don Miguel Ruiz. But the 5 agreements are: don't take things personally, don't make assumptions, be impeccable with your word, and always do your best. And the 5th agreement is be skeptical, but be willing to listen and be open-minded. So this is kind of what I've been integrated into my being over the last, I would say, nearly 8 years. And the first 2 years when I learned about this stuff, I didn't even bother. Like, I was like, okay, this makes sense. But I mean, I knew it cerebrally, but from an emotional standpoint, I didn't realize how profound it would be for me to really kind of practice personal mastery. So that's kind of what, I'm applying. So if I do get triggered by someone, I have to do my best not to make it mean anything about me, aka not take it personally. And then, go through the process of, and I say process quite lightly. It's not like I'm doing a systematic thing. It's just an embodied experience that I'm having of not making assumptions that this person is directing it towards me, or not making assumption that, I may not have the full picture around what they're saying or whatever, right? So those two is something that I practice, not taking things personally, not making assumptions. I practice those quite diligently. And then, being impeccable with your word is what me and Sweta were talking about this earlier. It's namely about the communication aspect. So the definition of being impeccable with your word is not using the word, aka our communication, our speech, our language, our speaking, against another human being or ourselves. So, talking smack and berating ourselves, let alone another person, is a huge no-no, because that's what perpetuates an emotional trigger, and can keep you locked into a triggered state, or can keep you conflicted with another human being. So, and always doing your best is just, you're always doing your best in some shape or form. Some days your best is not going to be good as another day, but to have a narrative that you're always doing your best. Yes, you are doing your best. When you're healthy, really healthy, your best is amazing. And when you're compromised, say you're going through stuff, because life is like that, your best is going to be different, but you're always doing your best. And you always can reflect on what your best is, and you can recognize whether you can do better or not. And it's not, you don't have to take yourself personally, right? If you messed up, right? Don't be in reaction to you being in reaction. It's a huge thing for all of us. Why did I get so triggered? I shouldn't have got so triggered. You have a bit of a shame spiral. And then the fifth agreement, being skeptical but open-minded, and being willing to listen. It's just, you're open to feedback. Because if you're not taking it personally, you're just like, okay, this is just information. This is just awareness, and I can decide. The skepticism is, not doubt in that sense, but I can choose whether I want to accept this person's information or not, their feedback or not. I have complete discernment and authority over that. Like, I can make the choice at the end of the day. It's my choice to whether to take it on board. So, and that's kind of how I have embodied healthy, sort of healthy relating with myself and other people. And that's kind of really what encompasses my experience of personal self-mastery. Now, I think I'm quite fortunate to come across that sort of literature and knowledge and stuff and wisdom. But I think a lot of people might be applying it already in varying degrees, just quite naturally. And I know Sweta, hasn't been formally trained in the way that I have and worked with Toltec wisdom the way I have. But I know that she's, part of her mastery is very evident that she does practice those things. So it is, for, if there was a framework per se, that's a good starting place. There's books on there, there's videos on it, all that type of stuff, very easy reads. But applying that really kind of gives you a base level of healthiness within ourselves, and in terms of relating with another person. Especially the four agreements come in really handy when you're dealing with someone that's really effing with your shit. Really fucking with your cheek, because we're gonna have that, especially if we have stuff around the opposite sex or whatever. Like, it's gonna be a thing, and we have to do our best to not make it mean something about us in some shape or form.
And we're in terms of that whole, the definitions of healthy and unhealthiness, sometimes we are, as you said, our own worst critics. And I am most definitely, right, my own worst critic. Yeah, my own sort of, I'm great, well, I'm not any, I catch it quick enough. But, in terms of when things don't quite go as they should be, or I'm feeling, oh my God, I should know better because I do this work. And there's this real self-critic, right? You're nodding me. So even more so, people that are in this field of, coaching, teaching, healing, and so forth, sometimes it might be like, oh my God, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And there's that dialogue within ourselves that is quite unhealthy, actually. And it's being able to catch that when you are having that unhealthy dialogue within yourself, to be like, hold on, what's that other side look like? To then turn that around, to get a fuller perspective of your wholeness. And that's the practice that I use myself. So Meehir, whilst you talk about the 5 agreements, for me, it's then, what are my values? It's coming back to the values.
Brilliant,
right?
Yeah.
Getting back to that, what is important here? What is it that is my genius? Reconnecting back with my higher self, right? And it's almost like getting the 2 sides of the coin, because when I say reconnecting with your wholeness, there's obviously a side of me that's very critical, but then there's also a genius higher self side to me as well. So there's an aspect then to be like, hold on, right, I'm not going to go into self-critical mode. Let me just get it out. What is it that the self-critic wants to say? I hear that. What is it that my higher self wants to say in this particular situation?
Yeah.
And I hear that. And then it's like you've got then the 2 sides of the coin. And then I have a choice. So God's given us free will, whatever your belief system is, but we have free will, right? So then it's my choice. I can continue beating myself up and stay in that, or I can choose to go with the wisdom that I'm getting from my higher self, which is, yeah, it didn't quite go to plan, but hey, we create and we adjust. Or there is another way. There's always going to be, if you're open to it, then if you then choose your higher self and what you're getting from your higher consciousness, your super consciousness, and you follow that through, there's a wisdom that comes up of then, right, and then to act on that, right, which is what I'm describing here as alchemy, basically.
Yeah.
Right, which in its literal sense is turning lead to gold. But if we just break that down, it's the lead being that self-critical side of me, and the gold being my higher self, holding that tension, seeing what that duality looks like, and then rising up to see, right, okay, well, what do I want to do from this point? And it's choice. It all comes down to choice at the end of the day, right? We then have a choice, and we could go back to default mode, but at least then I've got an awareness that I'm doing that.
Yeah.
Or I can catch myself and be like, oh, hold on, that's got a bit more charge than I thought. Let me, regroup, rewire, and go the other way, right?
Yeah.
So there's an aspect of that self-mastery, personal self-mastery within ourselves when we are that critic. And then it's that sense of also when we're getting triggered by other people, right? So mine, I mean, I'm, in single parent, co-parenting, right? So, lovely. My lovely ex-husband. To be fair, look, we've got a way where we are co-parenting in a healthy way, but it takes work. It has its moments. It can be challenging, right? And there have been moments where I have been triggered. It's going to happen. I'm human, all right? But what my focal point has been is that I have a higher vision. I have a higher vision. And that's what anchors me. So that's another side of this that also helps me to sort of self-regulate, is I check in with my higher vision, which is I choose the end result of, raising a happy and thriving daughter with two parents happily effectively co-parenting, right? And it's then coming back to that. It's always then coming back to that, right? That vision, right? Okay, he's triggering me. He's been I don't want to talk negatively about it, but he's been a pain in the ass. Right?
Yeah.
He's triggering me, right? But this situation actually did arise not that long ago. It's a couple of months ago, where, to be fair, things have been quite easy, and I think I took it for granted that we've got this down, this co-parenting thing. And then we had a moment where we disagreed, right? And it was something actually to do with my daughter, and it was quite important, and I did need to share it with him, right? So I shared it with him. It's then triggered a reaction in him, quite an angry response. Now, bearing in mind, this is not someone who is self-regulated, right? And this is the world we're in, right?
Well, he's not self-regulated to the degree that's
I am, yes.
Yeah, and that is to the degree that it's consistently healthy.
Yes, that's true. Yes. So not to the degree that I am, and not, that's the key word. Thank you, Meehir. Not consistently self-regulated, right? So it's then triggered an emotion in him, which is of anger, right? So he's gone quite explosive. That's then made me have a little bit of a shock response, like, oh my God, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Right. And I remember in my body, I took a step back. I'm not even sure, but I'm doing it right now because it's almost like not like I'm reliving it, but automatically my body went back. I was like, whoa, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Oh my God. Like, there's a reaction here. And I needed a moment actually to regroup. And it was an obviousness to kind of just step away, take a few deep breaths. And I was like, well, no, I haven't said anything wrong here. It's important for me because this is actually connecting back with my vision, quite an important thing to do with my daughter. So I went back, sort of reinforced it, and then let it go and left him in his reaction, right? After that, I actually had a good cry. And I don't know why. I don't know where these tears came from, but I remember I was shaking and there were tears. And I think it triggered a memory of our past when I was married. And, there was times where he would get angry and explosive, and that was all suddenly triggered in me, right? And I was again being critical of myself, saying, hold on, I do this work, I should know better, why am I responding and reacting to this, blah blah blah. So the self-critic has come in, and then fortunately I connected in with my higher vision. I was like, look, you're having a normal reaction. It's okay, you're upset. Obviously someone's going to be, what's your natural reaction? Of course you're going to be upset, right? So it was then reconnecting with that, acknowledging that, okay, I did need a cry. And then I tuned in. I literally did the process I've just said on here, connected with that self-critic. What was that? Connected with my higher. Well, look, it's fine. You're upset. And then the wisdom, which was to call one of my friends. Be like, look, just talk to someone about this. And just, that was it. And I did that, spoke to my friend. And then my concern at the time was about my daughter. I was like, I hope she's all right. I hope she's all right. Give me a sign. Give me a sign. And then it's quite funny, actually. I was on the phone to my friend. And she has a similar situation. She's also a single parent. Her ex-partner is also similar personality to mine. Said, look, this is just one of those things. It's because you've had it so plain sailing for such a long time that when something does go a bit rocky, it's just a shock to your system, which I did know. But sometimes you need someone else who's self-regulated themselves to play that back to you. Even though, like, I could be like, oh, Miss Know-it-all, I knew that. I needed someone to reflect that back to me. So it made sense why I got that wisdom to call this particular person, because it was to reflect that back to me. Right? I then regulated. In that course of that phone call, there was a lot of emotion. If you think about it, there's this blubbering mess to then, okay, all right. And then I was like, I just want to sign that my daughter's okay, because he was quite angry. I just want to know that she's all right. That's where my concern is. And then I looked out in the garden and this little rainbow appeared, like a proper full rainbow. And then I said to my friend, I said, well, there you go. There's your sign. It's freaking screaming out at you. She's cool. She's cool, right? I'm not saying, but, it depends what you believe. Sometimes, we ask for a sign, you might get it as something subtle, but mine was a blatantly obvious one, as in a rainbow, right? So it's one of those where there's different ways that you're going to be triggered. There's also that self-critic, and you can perpetuate that. And then it's also then seeing what does that look like in you? How is that played out? Of that lead in you, that unconscious beliefs that suddenly rise up, your higher self. What is it then, the inspired action to take? Any wisdom that's coming out, acting on that. It doesn't matter how silly it is, just do it. And then let them, that's magic. That is we're in the business of magic here. That is the personal self-mastery and the magic of that, and then the lightness and the ease. So if you think about it, and that all happened in the course of 2 hours, right? Luckily, I'm trained in this work and I followed that process.
Yeah.
But it was able to do that. I know for some people it will take a bit longer, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But that's because we know this work, and to be vulnerable, like, we're gonna get triggered. But we've got the tools to be able to self-regulate. You've got the 5 agreements, you've got the value systems to then underpin you and your foundations around that. Yeah. There's also tools, I think you use it, conflict with integrity, right?
Yeah, conflict resolution.
Yeah, and conflict resolution, conflict with integrity, where you kind of rise above the situation. It's a bit of an imagination game. And it's just, taking yourself out and like seeing it from a bird's eye point of view of this situation rather than being in it. So there's different mechanisms to be able to like self-regulate that
There is.
we can use.
Yeah, there is. It's quite a bit. And again, like, I don't want us to get, these are just some processes, and again, we're not trying to get prescriptive about it, but I do want to kind of take the conversation a little bit deeper, right? Because in your situation, you have I use this word lightly, right? But you have the luxury of going to a neutral corner. You don't live with him, right? So you can remove yourself from the proximity of that person, that's triggered. Now, not everyone has that. They don't have that opportunity to like remove themselves from the physical presence of another person. It's not that easy sometimes. So, I want to go a little bit, deeper around that. And again, I'm not trying to say this is what you should do. Like, I agree with what Sweta is saying, because you do need to tap into something higher so what is the best best course of action. But sometimes we can be so triggered that moving into an energy where you can tap into a higher like a higher source of information from our hearts, whatever. There's a little bit of an experience that needs to happen between going, being in the lead and ending up in the gold. And one of the things I think Sweta is implying it, but I don't think she's kind of articulated it. And one of the things that I teach, and what I've learned with my mentor and the work that we do at Creative Self Mastery, is there's this bit where when you're really stewing in it, you want to move into acceptance around the fact that you're stewing in it and it's all going to hell and it's crazy and it's bonkers. And the acceptance doesn't mean you're giving up or you're quitting. You're just being like, you know what, it's happening and it's okay. Like, this is what it means to self-regulate. Like, I'm having a moment, I'm having a tantrum. It feels like the walls are closing in, the world is falling, away, the sky is falling down and everything is crumbling, right? But the most powerful thing we can do is be like, it's okay. It's okay that this is happening. Now, that doesn't mean you're kind of like succumbing to the circumstance. You're just choosing, you're making the choice to accept that, to move into a place where actually, this is the reality right now. Instead of fighting it and being in reaction to the reaction, you're like, okay, it's happening. And then once, sometimes you got to do that over and over and over again. It's not like a one and done thing. It's not like an event. It truly is an internal process. Moving into acceptance is a huge self-regulatory experience. And then once you kind of moved into, and the whole idea behind self-acceptance and this thing around, self-regulation and personal mastery is so that you can get into a state of emotional neutrality. So you can be, you can create a little bit of a gap and a wedge between, your truth and your emotional experience, your reaction that you're in. So you can kind of step in and start turning the lead into gold and accessing, information from a higher place, or getting into your heart again, and then proceeding, whether it means walking away or taking a break, or whether it means, powerfully, resolving a conflict with another person, so and so forth. And that's kind of like, it's not easy to do, especially if you haven't had much practice.
Mm.
um, I think as humans, I think we really kind of fight reality sometimes. Like, we don't want to accept that things are that
Mm.
bad. And because we don't accept that things are that bad, it kind of perpetuates, the feeling of how bad it is. And if we can just say, look, it's pretty effed up right now, um, but it's okay.
Mm.
And and when I mean it's okay, that again, it's not like this is allowed type thing. It's just like, look, it's happening, and I'm just accepting that it's happening right now. All with the intention and end result of being like, okay, I'm accepting what's happening so I can get to a better place. Right? We've all been there in numerous points in our lives where we're like,
Yeah.
we're at a crossroad, or we just feel like things have changed so dramatically, and then we're fighting the change, and we're like, actually, you know what, let the change happen, let this moment happen. So I wanted to speak to that a little bit. And I
Yeah.
also, is there something you want to share about that as well?
I did, and I'm glad you've mentioned that, because it goes on what we talked about in the last episode about if you
Yeah.
just hold on to those emotions, right? They are then at some point gonna want to burst and come out, and if they do, it's going to be in a dysfunctional way, right?
Mm.
So that acceptance part is a bit of leaning into it.
Yeah.
So as I said, in that situation with my ex-husband, where I broke down and cried,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't mean anything about me. I was upset. But if I was in my other state, it's like, well, I shouldn't cry. And no, maybe I shouldn't have said that. There's part of me was like, oh, I take back what I would say, right? And just to keep the peace. That there was a pattern in me, which was just to keep the peace, just to keep things all right. I'll just take that back. It's not that important,
Mm.
right? But there was part of me was like, no, but it is. I had to cry. I had to. It didn't mean I've lost the plot and I'm a blubbering mess. Might have been for a little while, but that's okay, right? It was just to melt into that. It's to it the acceptance of I'm upset,
Yeah.
acknowledging that feeling, and then being like, right, actually, right, okay, there is the peacemaker in me that wants to just be like, actually, just keep your mouth shut, don't say anything again, let's keep the peace, let's not rock the boat.
Yeah. I want to
Or
talk about
there's,
that in a minute, by the way.
yeah, there is that side. Or there was the other side of me, which again my friend articulated back to me, which is like, well, you didn't say anything wrong, Shwell.
Mm.
You didn't say anything wrong. And I was like, tell me. And I remember I was asking her for validation. Did I say anything wrong? Because I'm asking for that validation to be able to take it
Yeah.
back, to stay in peacemaker mode, right?
Yeah.
And then she was like, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
And it's actually perfectly normal. He's just had a reaction to it. And it's normal that obviously, if you're faced with anger, my reaction was I was triggered myself, but mine wasn't anger back towards him. It could have been but in that moment, it was, if I stayed in my dysfunction, I would have just continued fighting or just
Yeah.
let it go.
Yeah.
Right. Those were the two, fight or flight, basically
Right.
basic modes that we have. Right. So I could have gone into fight or flight or even freeze. Or I chose, actually, there was integrity in what I said. I am upset. Right, let's hold it and just leave it, let it go.
Mm.
Right. So there is that, but part of that was the acceptance, leaning into that emotion,
Yep.
and then rising back up to, okay, this is what I've got to do. That is a big part of this journey of, the self mastery, self regulation, personal self mastery, a really big part. And I say it simply, but it is simple.
Yeah. It's not easy though.
It's not easy,
Yeah.
no.
But it is simple.
True.
You're absolutely right. It's simple.
What I've described is quite simple, right? In
Yeah.
terms of for want of a better word, as a process,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's then to do that. And because I've been doing it and you've been doing this for quite a long time, we know it's our go-to. But that is like anything, you know, like when you learn to ride a bike, you know, first it's a bit rusty and then you get going, right? So this is the same. It's then kind of retraining ourselves to then go and take a different direction. Right? So yeah, sorry, that's the only thing I wanted to like press on that.
No, good. No, I'm glad. Yeah, no, I'm glad you shared this. See, the thing is like we're not trying to get rid of our emotions. We're just trying to have a healthy relationship with them. Now, there's nothing wrong in being sad. There's nothing wrong in feeling fearful. There's nothing wrong in feeling angry, right? That's I think a lot of I think we're I think what really messes with us, especially if some people struggle with their emotions and they don't know how to deal with them or the outward expression of them, is, you know, we feel wrong for feeling wrong. We shouldn't be fearful right now. We shouldn't be sad right now. We shouldn't be angry right now. And I think that really kind of messes with us. Now, if we're saying, you know, when we're moving into acceptance, we're like, it's okay that we feel this way, right? The reason why we want to say it's okay is so that we don't play them out, right? We don't actually act from there. We don't behave from, you know, we don't behave from a reactionary place. Like, let's say you're angry, and then you get into an adversarial dynamic with the other person. It becomes essentially an argument, and in worst cases, like a proper football and fight. You know, or if your fear is triggered, you kind of just avoid, like you run away, and you kind of try and escape and stuff like that. And if you're so sad about things, you do become, you know, debilitated in your ability to kind of operate in a functional manner. But let's take anger, for example, right? I think anger is a hugely misunderstood emotion, but it's also one of the most powerful emotions that we have. And one of the things that I've kind of learned around my journey with anger, like I used to really repress my anger, like really repress it and suppress it. And then if I would have, I think a lot of men do, right? And a lot of Asian men I know have this problem. They got this thing around, you know, the angry boy, the angry Indian boy sort of syndrome, right? I think, you know, a lot of them have it to in varying degrees. I know I had a little bit of that. I don't think it was destructive outwardly, but it was destructive within myself. Like it really kind of cost me a lot of mental stability and well-being. Now, what do I mean by this is, look, anger is the emotion that drives action, right? All our behavior, our actions are based, you know, when we make a choice and we act from that place, it's an emotional decision. The choice, the idea of a choice is using emotion functionally in a conscious way. So anger in varying degrees, like, is the emotion. Now let's take away the full-blown anger, like madness, aggression, whatever. Like, let's just park that for a second. Now, if we have a healthy relationship with our anger, it's resolving the discrepancy of the conflict of where I am right now and where I want to be. So if we're working in, you know, trying to create a vision and where we have a dream or we have an end result, an outcome that we want, the fact that we know we had that outcome and then we know that we're actually not there, and the current reality right now is I'm not there right now, is it's the energy of anger that says, okay, I need to close the gap between where I'm at right now and where I want to be, right? Anger is what underpins that movement, right? So it might not be pure full-blown anger outrage, but it's just like an emotional charge that's enough to get us moving, right? To get us taking action, right? We want to resolve the discrepancy of where we want to be and where we're at right now. Now, if, you know, if let's say we're, you know, coming back to the angry boy syndrome stuff, right? If we don't have a healthy relationship with anger and we've bought into a narrative where anger is bad, inherently bad, most of us won't experience anger fully. And when we experience it, we are a complete wreck, right? We either are afraid of it, we're actually afraid of anger in others and in ourselves. And then when we kind of have a huge reaction to maybe ourselves or someone else feeling, if we've taken something personally and the reaction is anger, it's like it can be really explosive, right? But if we recognize that, and then a lot of people act out their anger towards another person. Now, that's what usually happens when we're not practicing self-mastery, self-regulation.
Yes.
Because anger is also the emotion that creates boundaries, right? If we're talking about agreements and boundaries, which is healthy for healthy boundaries, healthy agreements with yourselves and other people, anger is the emotion that keeps those boundaries up, right? Not barriers, boundaries, right? And the boundaries are specifically designed to move emotional energy and the um, personal dynamic between you and another person and the world and whatever, right? But anger is what underpins it. That's the emotions that is the emotion that drives the upholding of boundaries. So like, let's say when we're a child, your parent asks you to do something and you're like, as a child who doesn't have much conditioning or whatever, he just has pure raw emotion, the child says no, right? That's anger. And no is a full sentence, right? No is a full sentence, right? And no means boundary, don't cross it, right? Now, if we've not learned that, and our parents haven't honored that part of it, and they haven't honored that part of them in themselves, when we don't get to learn how to use anger in a really healthy and functional way, right? Especially when it comes to relating with another human being. So if we're able to use anger in a really sort of constructive way, we can be like, because say, let's say you and your ex-partner, he's having an emotional reaction. Now, first things first, he's taken something very personally, and he's
Oh
made
yeah.
and he's made it mean something about him, whether it's related to him being a father or being an ex-partner to you or being a man in the face of you being a
Absolutely.
woman. All of this stuff is happening, right? But if he had a little bit more skills in his toolbox, he'll be able to be like, okay, what is this really about? Like, why am I feeling this level of charge around this, right? And rather than lashing out and shouting towards the other person, you know he can still be in the heightened state, but he's like, no, I want to get this to a healthy place, and I'm going to use my anger to get to a healthy place, to drive my behavior in a powerful, conscious way. It's like, I want truth, because anger is also the emotion that demands truth, right? Healthy anger, okay? There's a lot more nuance to this, but I'm kind of just giving a generalized perspective. But
Yeah.
because conflict is about getting to the truth, right? We want to resolve the conflict because we want to come to a shared truth between you and the other person or a set of people. So if he had a little bit more tools in his toolbox, he could have a constructive conversation, and he could ask questions. He's like, Sweta, is that what you meant? Do you mean this about me? And then you could have just been like, not at all, right? Like, but if you don't have a healthy relationship with anger, you can't even talk properly. Like, I've been like, recently I got triggered about something. It's very rare these days, and I was angry about it, but there was so much going on inside me because of other reasons. And then when I spoke to this person, I just, I came out sounding like an asshole. um I was being a dick. I didn't want to be a dick, but I was so overcome by all the stuff that was going inside me. I was like, shit, like, I had a moment where it played out dysfunctionally. Now, I like to pride myself on the fact that if I go into anger and I misbehave with my anger, like, I will do everything in my power to kind of make that right and fix the mistake. I'm not going to waste time festering into like, I shouldn't have done this or whatever. I'm like, I want to move on. I'm sorry. What do I need to do? What can we do to make this right again? That's it. That's kind of that's usually my go-to situation or go-to experience. So, but yeah, so, and even you, like, if, and this is the final point I want to make in this part. So even you, like, you feeling like, whoa, this person's anger, his energy is a lot. Now, if you were comfortable, even more comfortable in your anger, you would have been like, back up, right? Like, no, right? So you'd be like, no, you don't. That's not the energy we need to have this conversation. That's still you using your anger in a functional way, because you're saying no. You're setting up a boundaries like, no, homie, no, bro, you don't get to do that. That's not how we do this here, right? In service to our relationship and to our shared commitment to serving our daughter, we need to be better than this. So, calm the F down, and let's have a constructive conversation, right? Eventually, we can get to that. Initially, it takes time. Like, we break down, we're like, this is hard, this is painful, I feel hurt, I've taken it personally, I need to do that. By all means, you got to do what's true for you. But eventually, you want to be able to have the conversation using anger in a functional way and be like, boundaries, agreements, let's be better people, for a common good, right? Which is, in your case, your daughter, for the most part, now that because you still have a relationship with your ex.
Yeah. I love what you've said, because initially I was like, oh, where's he going with this? As in anger having a functional emotion. But as you did, you're right. It is about that boundaries piece of yes, this, and no to that. There is that, if you look at it from the elements point of view, it's that fieriness, right? And fire isn't bad, right? But if fire is out of control, then it causes destruction, which we know. But a little bit of fire is actually good, right? And it made me, as you were talking, I was thinking about like the gods and the goddesses, right? So if we look at, I went to see Seema Anand, and she was retelling the story of the 10 tantric goddesses. And she talked about Sati, right? Sati is the wife of Shiva, right?
Yeah.
And she wasn't receiving what she needed from Shiva. Right. Now, I'm not going to retell the whole story, but I'm just going to fast forward a little bit here. Yeah. But she wasn't receiving what she would love from Shiva, right? To a point where things happen, and then she was just like, you're taking the piss now. It was just too much. She changed form, her angers kicked in, and she changed into Kalima, right? Where it's a form of her fire, a form of her expression, a form of, it comes from anger, but it's because he's crossed a boundary. It's like, no, you've gone too far. And there's a part of, I think for Asian women, we're a bit afraid of that fire, because we're like, we don't want to come across as that kind of person, right? Who am I to take on that role, right? And they're going to think I've gone like lost the plot. And I had that sort of relationship because I'm with my ex who has this real heightened anger, and I've seen it in a very dysfunctional way play out. I'm feeling that I've got to contain my fire, right? And therefore contain that angry emotion in me, and therefore to be the opposite. So the opposite of anger is calm. Yeah. And to a degree that's true, because you don't want to meet fire with fire. So there is an element of truth in that, but there is also an element of truth in my functional fire coming up saying, no, this is important and you're not listening. And it's almost like you kind of role played it a little bit, but that is pretty much what happened. Where I did stick to my boundaries, but articulated it, that emotion, but using that my fire, but in a very direct way, as in, this is important, let's respect that.
Yeah.
And diffusing it as well, as in, right, it doesn't need to be a big explosion.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it actually turned around quite quickly.
See?
Right? It turned around. I mean, this is a regular occurrence where I'm stuck with him for the rest of my life. Right? So there's going to be ups and downs. But in a way, it's then, for me, it's good, because it's practicing that self-mastery. It's practicing them playing with my fire.
Yeah.
Right? And then whilst that's happened in that situation, I'm going to be triggered in other situations where I'm thinking, I've got to be calm. I've got to be the peacemaker. What I'm then doing is like suppressing a part of me. Right? And then when we look at it from the mythology, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not, but from the perspective of the goddess of that Sati changing to Kali.
Yeah.
Right? It's when a boundary is crossed, and it's like, you need to take that role on, where that fire needs to kick in. And then if you notice, then Kali comes back to Sati after. right? It doesn't always just stay there, right? It
No.
comes back, but when it
Yeah.
needs to, it's there. It's a superpower,
Yeah.
right?
It's
But at the same time, it can be dysfunctional. As I said, I've seen it play out that way
yeah.
as
It can be dysfunctional if there is no consciousness around it,
well.
right?
Yes.
So taking the myth around Sati and Kalima, um, it's an embodiment of of anger and energy, but in a really conscious way, because what
Mm,
she's trying to do ultimately, anger is also the emotion. Like I talked about conflict, right? Conflict, the overarching emotions mostly in resolving conflict is anger. So if there's injustice or there's imbalance and there is no righteousness, um, it's anger is the one that is designed to restore it, to restore the balance back again. Because you're like, why are we out of balance? I need to sort this out. It's not, it's not that it doesn't serve me to stay avoiding this experience, and I'm not going to be afraid of my anger. Like I have enough awareness and consciousness and skills, and I'm so empowered in how I feel about myself based on the tools that I have, the value system that I have, and the identity, aka I know who I am. And then we can be like, okay, I know how to use my emotions in a really powerful way, especially anger. So because the more you repress anger, this is what happens though, right?
mm,
um any emotion repressed is going to lead to some mental health breakdown, some neurosis. So the long-term denial of my anger, when I didn't use my anger in a really functional way, aka what do I mean by that? So using my anger to take action about my life and creating the amazing things in my life, and I kept repressing that. I kept holding myself back and going into my fear and doubt, um, rather than tapping into my anger. It's like, I want this amazing life. And I was like, I'm going to make it happen. I want the best relationships. I'm just going to make this shit happen. Because I kept repressing it, long-term anger repression turns into hopelessness, aka depression,
mm,
right? So
mm.
this is the cost of denying our anger chronically. Okay, especially as men. Like, I think we've been shamed for being angry. I think a lot, not just men, but men and women. Like, we anger is someone we there's a really sort of crappy narrative around anger. But if you read like scriptures and biblical, the amount of violence in them is crazy, and we're like trying to repress that shit. Like, I don't get it, right? So
But to be fair, the caveat is shows both, though, right? The functional and the dysfunctional.
absolutely right. There's you cannot, but that's the thing. I think we've been polarized to be like anger is inherently destructive and bad, but it's not. It's the thing. Children know how to use anger well. When you try and discipline them, and they're like, no, right? They're like, no, do this, no, right? Do this, and I'm like, no, right? Because they're like, if you're just going to tell me without explaining to me, then I don't want to know. Same thing happens as adults, but with adults, instead of like saying no or saying explain to me why I should be doing this, then all right, I can see that, okay, this could serve me and it serves us. I'm down with that, right? That's what it means to, like, reparent ourselves and to parent another child, right? They need to be explained as to what your reasoning is, right? um so so if we're able to kind of tap into that a little bit more rather than like flailing our anger, then we can have a much more powerful and productive life. And it doesn't have to turn into this angry boy syndrome that a lot of Asian guys have,
Mm,
and
mm,
it causes a huge wedge between them and the opposite sex. And I, you know, I don't ever, when I've lashed out when my anger hasn't been, you know, consciously directed. Like, I've had it's been a really long time. Because I've noticed every time I lash out, I've done this work long enough. My higher self, my heart space, moment when I've had my reactions, like, dude, you hemorrhage so much energy, you know, acting out your anger, right? You lost so much, and you created separation between you and that other person. That person is upset, you know, all of this type of stuff. Like when it's at somebody, it's hugely destructive, right? And it's at ourselves, hugely destructive, right? When we're really angry and we don't know why we're angry, like we're it's going to be aimed towards another person or ourselves for the most part. But if we realize, like, no, this anger doesn't mean anything about us, but it's about something that I want to, you know, resolve, and I want to get to the truth of something, then yeah, you're like, okay, cool, what is the truth here? Let's find out. Do I find out on my own? Do I need the support of someone else? To like, do I need to find out together? So just want
Yeah.
to share that and reiterate that just a little bit.
No, I'm glad you did. But there is also, you know, particularly with Asian men, anger is an easy emotion to show. Yeah. And I know that sounds crazy, but for men, you don't want to, it almost masks some of that vulnerability that
So
you're upset about something, that
yeah,
you know what I mean? It's masking that. And you'd rather be angry and lash out
yeah,
than actually say, you know what, I'm hurt by this. Actually, you know what? They probably inside are crying,
yep.
but the emotion that they want to display is anger.
So
And in a dysfunctional way, and if
mhm.
they're not, you know, emotionally aware and got that self mastery, they are not going to be. So all you're going to get is that explosive reaction,
So
right?
one of the things is that there's a huge difference between how men usually deal with their own shame,
Mm,
right? And women deal with their shame differently. Men's
mm,
go-to emotion with shame is actually anger
yeah,
first, right? Because it makes them feel so vulnerable to feel ashamed that anger is like, you know, the place to go. Now, couple that with, okay, you can lash out and whatever, but now couple that with the fact that if anger is bad, then you, aka it's shameful to be angry. You got a toxic, deadly cocktail of emotions. There's shame, anger, guilt, you know, fear, you know, and then underneath it all it is the sadness that needs to, you know, come out and be
yeah,
expressed. It's like, look, I'm just hurt. I'm really hurt by this experience, right? So, but this is the thing: if men are in their shame, they're gonna go to anger because anger is the easy emotion to kind of deal with as a man in most cases, rather than actually feel like, oh my god, I'm in so much pain and I feel vulnerable, and it doesn't make me feel like a man, like strong and bold and whatever. Makes me feel like a complete weakling right now, and it's, you know,
yeah,
and it's, you know, we don't want to accept that we are just as vulnerable as any other. If a bullet goes through a man or a woman, it's going to be result in the same experience, you know. um
yeah. And it can be then the opposite then for a woman, where we're then containing that fire, where we're actually not good with our boundaries and we're just allowing things, and then suddenly it will erupt and we get into the Kali room. It's like, now enough is enough,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I know that from a personal experience. That's definitely happened for me, where I've been very poor with a boundary. So, you know, after I'd, you know, divorced and all the rest of it, my first relationship that I got into post being divorced
Mm,
was with a guy for about a year, but it didn't feel true. You know, when a relationship just doesn't feel true and you're like, you're not meant to be with this person,
right.
right? And then part of me was like, oh my God, how do I tell this person? Because I knew they had a very angry persona and they're
Yeah,
not going to take this well, right?
yeah.
So I did it, and guess what? They had an angry reaction to it, which perhaps I've perpetuated that as well because I thought that was going to happen. My response to his anger was I went back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember my default response, peacemaker? Suddenly I went back and I wasn't upholding that boundary of I don't want to be with you because I thought, oh my God, who am I to say this? I've got to do this nicely, got to be Miss Peacemaker and do it. But
Mm-hmm.
then it got to a point where it was just so much anger towards me that this man was directing, which mainly, if you think about it, he's hurt. He's
Yep.
hurt. He's upset because the
Okay.
relationship's coming to an end. There is a truth to it. You know, my truth was, and it was part of me to hold that boundary. It was true not to be in this relationship anymore.
Mm.
I endured his anger for quite a while because I was in my peace. But then it got to the point where my golly, my came, I was like, come on now. Yeah. Enough is enough. This is a blatant no. And it's a X as well, marks the spot. As in, I don't even want to be friends with you. Right? Where it's a total boundary was crossed. And I had to say no.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's, you can call it anger, but it was more like actually very assertive fire. And a little bit of that anger emotion, a little bit my kalima that came out. I was like, no, I don't need this. I don't need you. And I don't need to be receiving this. And I shouldn't be apologetic for the fact that I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. Right. So there is that sense of being able to uphold boundaries, knowing your response in that. And particularly with Asians, when you're faced with an angry Asian man and a woman's response to that, where we've got to put a caveat here. There can be very dysfunctional situations here. There can be where it's abusive. Let's just call it for what it is, right? Where it is abusive. And sadly, as women, we do endure it, but there has to come a point where, our kalima needs to come out.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a bit of reprogramming because, if you've been receiving that for quite a long while and being the peacemaker, thinking it's your fault. I mean, I was guilty of that. I thought, oh my God, it's my fault. You take on, the self-critic comes in, I deserve this anger, because he's upset. I should take it on. It's like, no, you don't need to.
Yeah.
Right. So there is a fine line here. It's probably, a conversation to continue here because there's a lot of depth here to this.
No, totally. And, we'll kind of wrap this up now. I think, look, that I think in the mainstream media and whatever, you hear a lot about, men playing out their anger dysfunctionally and becoming abusive. But it happens even with women playing out their anger in an abusive way. It's quite common, especially if a man who's not really comfortable with his anger, he will be susceptible to someone else's, right? And vice versa. Like a woman who's not really in touch with her anger and is not assertive, she'll be susceptible to a man's anger. And either parties can become very dominant and domineering and dysfunctional if anger is played out. And if we are not secure and empowered within ourselves and healthy with our anger, we can say, yo, like, no, back off, or this is not cool. And we need to get to a place we can either go our separate ways, or we can come to a healthy mutual agreement. So we've talked about what it is in, I would say, most relationships. We haven't gone to the extreme where things can go abusive. And there is definitely a conversation that needs to be had around that, because I've had my own experiences of that, being on the receiving end. I know Sweta has. So, and we want to talk about that in a really sort of healthier way, because I'm not going to claim myself to be a victim of that experience. I don't think Sweta is either. No. I just think sometimes we get ourselves in situations that if we're here to learn about ourselves, sometimes it takes very extreme situations to be like, oh, Sweta talks about we're always choosing everything, whether we are doing it consciously or unconsciously. And sometimes we can choose really unconsciously really shitty experiences and shitty situations. And if we're saying, if Sweta and I are espousing that we are the creators of our lives, we are the powerful creators of our lives, and we have full agency, that means we're also saying that sometimes we're also going to choose very debilitating experiences that compromise us, just to prove narratives, that really painful, hurtful narratives that already live inside of us. And what we're trying to say is that doesn't have to be the truth, and you can be on the other side of that and create something that's powerful and healthy with you and other people. So loads more to come.
There is. And just a parting thought around this is just to come back to the premise, which we kind of said, but it's around your emotions create the action, right? Your emotions create motions, right? An action. So we focused here on the emotion of anger, and how the action or the motion that could play out functionally and dysfunctionally, right? And how it is also about upholding our boundaries, and then being an awareness back to that self-regulation piece of regulating within yourself. And just, a parting thought is just notice that in yourself. Notice, where are you good with your boundaries? Where are you not? Where does that kind of play out a bit to fire, destructive fire? Or where is that fire not even being lit?
Yeah.
Right? Like I said, with me, the peacemaker. And I think I'm just going to have to dampen that fire down, right? So it has that extreme. Just have that awareness, and it's just part of you. Just an awareness that is part of who you are. And then know you've got a choice then to embody a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And no, I just want to kind of just this whole boundary thing. Having boundaries is one thing, but upholding them is always an ongoing process, right? And getting clear on who we are and the agreements we want to have with ourselves and other people, and the boundaries we want to create and keep up. It's all a cultivation. It's a constant exercise of personal mastery. Always, it's not a one and done thing. Always, so it's a perpetual way of being. All right. So
yeah, and then one more, particularly for the female listeners on there, let's not be afraid of our fire, right? Which I feel want to talk more about it. But then whilst there's that boundary aspect of that fire, there's also a real sexual energy to our fire as well. There's a superpower in that fire. So just notice that. Let's lean into that a little bit more. And yeah, we can talk more about that in a future episode.
Totally. Amazing. No, thank you, Sweta. And guys, we'll catch you on the next one. All right. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy this episode, we'd love to hear from you. So leave us a comment or get in touch with us via the details in the show description.
And if you really enjoyed this episode, share it with someone that could benefit from our conversation. And stay tuned in for the next episode.